You are in the W column. Welcome back. I'm your host, Paul Westfall, and we are continuing our very special show from the CIF Southern Section headquarters. This is the CIF Southern Section SoCal Ford 11-man football championship pairings release show. We have gone through a number of the divisions so far, but now the one that everybody's been waiting for and the one that is sort of moves the needle, it is indeed Division One. Division One has not only some of the best teams in the Southern Section, some of the best teams in the nation in many of these national rankings have been dominated throughout the year by teams in this particular section, and I think that this is the toughest section to win of any championship in any state in the country, and now we are ready for Division One. There are 18 teams in Division One to start the season, so 16 in and 2 out, but it always leaves somebody out who is a really strong team who could do some damage if they happen to be in a different division. But if you're in Division One, it is a arduous task. Last year, Upland and Tesoro were in Division One. They have been moved to Division Two, as we discussed in the Division Two bracket, and replacing them in Division One this year were San Clemente and Murrieta Valley, and the two teams that finished in the Division II final last year that San Clemente prevailed. So with that in mind, let's take a look at the bracket from Division I. The top-ranked team in Division I all season long and the top-ranked team in the country, the Mater Dei Monarchs. This is by far the best team that I have seen certainly since the 90s, in the decade of dominance for Bruce Rollinson, where they won 5 CIF championships. But I think this one might just be the best Mater Dei team ever, and I am not one for those kinds of superlatives. I got a look close up and personal with Mater Dei against Servite, broadcast that one for Monarch TV on last Friday night, and the Monarchs look as dominant as ever. Spectacular collection of offensive explosivity led by quarterback J.T. Daniels, who just might be the best quarterback in the country, and a host of big-time wide receivers, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Brew McCoy, Nico Remigio, C.J. Parks. They are just absolutely loaded at every position, an offensive line that features 5 high Division I caliber linemen, led by Tommy Brown, who's going to Alabama, which tells you all you need to know about that, and a defense that I think is the key to everything. Some years, including last year when Mater Dei ran off the first 13 games, only to lose to St. John Bosco in the final, the Mater Dei defense this year is better. They are better at every level. They have high Division I caliber players in the defensive front, at the linebacking positions, and in the secondary was the big key for the Monarchs this year. They lost their 5 best defensive backs, and many of them to major Division I colleges. And so it was a new secondary back there, and they're playing a bunch of sophomores, a junior and 1 senior in Stefan Robbins, and yet the secondary has been up to the challenge. They have faced some very good teams, and Mater Dei has run the table in defiant fashion. Only 1 game even close during the regular season. That was a 10-point win over St. John Bosco. Otherwise, they have run roughshod over the rest of the Trinity League and out of league with wins over big-time programs like Bishop Gorman, who was nationally ranked at the time, St. Mary's, who was always a title contender out of Northern California. This Mater Dei team of Bruce Rollinson's just might be the best in Bruce's 29 years. The Monarchs will face Vista Murrieta, the number 3 team out of the Southwestern League. Vista Murrieta started very slowly. David Olson's team scheduled a very difficult non-league schedule. Vista Murrieta played a number of quality teams back to back to back. They played Mission Viejo, they played J. Sarah, and they played Orange Lutheran, and so they got off to a slow start at 0-4, but found their sea legs, so to speak, and ended up finishing 3-2 in the Southwestern League, and at 4-6 they got the 16 seed. It'll be Mater Dei against Vista Murrieta, and the Broncos, they've got their work cut out for them. This Mater Dei team looks focused, and they probably are not going to look past anyone. So it'll be a tough one for Vista Marietta in the opening round against Mater Dei. On that same side of the bracket, the 8-9 game, and this should be an absolute, just a fantastic contest between two very talented teams with great quarterbacks, great offensive talent, and some pretty good guys on the other side of the ball as well. Long Beach Poly, the Moore League champion, they're the 8 seed. They will take on Chase Sarah, at-large berth out of the Trinity League. Chase Sarah started really fast. They got off 5-0 in non-league play. They ended up 7-3 overall with all their losses coming in the Trinity League. They lost to Mater Dei big, they lost to Bosco, and they lost to Santa Margarita in a tough one, 36-35. So Chase Sarah goes in as the 9 seed. They will have to travel to take on Long Beach Poly in a game that I'm not sure I can pick a winner in there, but if I had to, I'd say perhaps Long Beach Poly at 8-2. Poly just a couple of plays away from being 10-0. Long Beach Poly lost to Mission Viejo in non-league 12-7, and then they lost in Week 10 in a game that I'm not sure they took as seriously as maybe they would if it really counted. They lost in an unusual Week 10 non-league matchup with Gardena Serra. They lost 24-20 in a game where they didn't even play Matt Corral, their first-string quarterback, and yet they battled Serra all the way down to the finish line. So Poly just a couple of plays away from being 10-0, but as usual, the Moore League champion, dominant through the league. And that's why I think they scheduled that Week 10 game against Serra was generally they beat their opponents so badly in the Moore League that it's been a while since they've played a tough game, and a nice piece of scheduling by Antonio Pierce to get Serra in there in Week 10. And so it'll be Long Beach Poly and Jay Serra in a game that if I wasn't going to be who knows where with Prep Zone, Long Beach Poly and Jay Serra might be a fun one to go to. And if you're in the area, you won't be disappointed if you check that one out. On that same side of the bracket, and all of these games are incredibly compelling, you've got Mission Viejo, the South Coast League champion, 10-0. Bob Johnson's last season, he announced about midway through the league season that this is going to be his final year for one of the great coaches in the history of prep football in this country. Bob Johnson, a good friend and a guy I have admired and respected for an awfully long time. You know that much like the Edison Chargers from last year when Dave White announced that it was his final season, the Edison Chargers played with a accelerated purpose. They didn't want Dave White's career to end, and the Chargers took that motivation all the way to the Division III championship. I'm sure Mission Viejo is going to play with that same sense of purpose. They do not ever want Bob Johnson's coaching career to finish, so they're going to play like every game is the most important game of their lives, and Mission Viejo is loaded with talent. They've got a terrific quarterback in Joey Yellen, the St. John Bosco transfer. They've got a number of great skill players, Elijah Griffin, Austin Osborne at the wide receivers. Achille Arnold has filled in for the injured Jamari Farrell and done a great job at running the football. They've got a Pac-12 linebacker in Christian Laval who is as good as any that I've seen this year. Mission Viejo gets Servite for the second year in a row in the first round, and the Friars under Scott Meyer having their best season in recent memory, 6-4 on the year. Servite's got a ton of talent as well. Ryan McMahon. T.J. McMahon has done a terrific job in his first year as the quarterback with that new system. They imported a couple of assistant coaches from Corona Centennial in the Bass brothers, Mike Bass and Ryan Bass, so they play a little more up-tempo than Servite teams of the past. They'll spread you out and go 4 wide. They've got great talent. Julius Irvin, Leroy's son, excellent two-way player. DeLon Hurt, also a two-way player that's as good a wide receiver in a year where there's a ton of great wide receivers in the Southland. DeLon Hurt is the real deal. They've got a lot of guys, but they got their work cut out for them with everything that I mentioned about Mission Viejo playing as if they never want the season to end. I think it's going to be tough for Servite to beat Mission Viejo, but I expect that the Friars will acquit themselves nicely, and they'll give the Diablos all they want for at least a little while. I think Mission Viejo eventually prevails, though, because that's a very talented team that could do some damage in Division I. Rounding out the rest of the top half of the bracket, Chaminade Ed Croson's Chaminade Eagles, Mission League champion. They played a really difficult non-league schedule to get themselves ready for this type of thing. Chaminade has an exceptional offensive array of players. Andrew Van Buren, their running back that they expected to have back, TJ Pledger, he took his talents to IMG Academy over there in Florida, and Andrew Van Buren has stepped into the fray, and he has been magnificent. He is a high-level Division I player. Chaminade comes out of a tough league. They actually scheduled St. John Bosco in the non-league just to sort of get ready. And you'd have to think that Chaminade is going to be a tough out. They get Orange Lutheran. Lou started out the season 5-0 under first-year head coach J.P. Presley, and Ryan Helinski at quarterback might be the most improved quarterback that I've seen this year. They've got a lot of talent on offense, led by Kyle Ford, the Servite transfer, who, once again, I mean, I've seen them all. I've seen Marcus Spiker and Amon-Ra St. Brown and just so many tremendous wide receivers this year in the Southland. Well, Kyle Ford takes a back seat to nobody. And so Helinski to Ford will succeed at least a few times against Chaminade, but I don't think they have enough to get past Chaminade in round one. And it certainly looks, at least to me, like Chaminade and Mission Viejo are headed for a collision in the quarterfinals, the 4 and 5 seed. On the opposite side of the bracket, and as I say, every game is absolutely compelling in Division I. You've got the number 2 seed Centennial, the Big 8 champ, only 9 games. They couldn't find another game. Nobody wants to play Centennial, can't blame them. But 8-1 on the year with their only loss coming to IMG Academy. They get Gardena Serra. The number 2 seed gets Gardena Serra out of the Mission League in the first round, and Serra, always so perplexing, a tremendous amount of talent. If you watch football on Saturdays, you see guys from Gardena Serra all over the screen on Saturdays, and Gardena Serra played a really difficult non-league schedule. They lost to Punahou in a game I had the pleasure to broadcast from the Honor Bowl, in a game that went right down to the final seconds. They lost to Narbonne, where they lost that one in the final seconds, and then they lost to Chaminade 37-32 and Bishop Amat 21-14 in league. So they are like 5 plays away from being 10-0. And yet they're 6-4, and their reward for that is they get to take on Centennial. And I have to remind you of, in 2014, Serra tied for the league championship along with Crespi and Bishop Amat. So there was a 3-way tie, so they did the coin flip thing. And Serra wound up getting the number 3 seed. So their reward for that was they were sent to Centennial in the first round. And in talking to both Matt Logan and Scott Altenberg, we all agreed that if this was a semifinal game, everybody would feel that was a pretty good matchup. Well, it was a first-round game, and it was as wild a football game as I've ever seen. It was 21-19 Serra at the end of the first quarter. It was 35-34 Serra at the end of the half. It was 56-54 Serra at the end of 3. And then Centennial got the last score and won 68-64. And in a game where Khalil Tate from Serra, and it makes me laugh that all of these national commentators now are suddenly finding out who Khalil Tate is. Well, those of us that watch Southern California football knew who Khalil Tate was for a long time. In that game against Corona Centennial, Khalil Tate combined for 600 yards of total offense and 8 touchdowns. And he almost beat Centennial by himself. And that was as fun a game as I've had a chance to broadcast. Chris Hale and I talk about that game today. As fun a game as we've ever had a chance to broadcast with, in a game that mattered. You know, sometimes you get regular season games that are kind of wild and woolly and great fun, but this one mattered. And Serra nearly pulled the great upset. They lost 68-64. I do not expect this year's game to be quite as high scoring, but Serra is filled with a ton of athletes, and Centennial is Centennial. The faces change, but the scoring still, they still put up the points. They're averaging nearly 60 points a game. Matt Logan has the most imaginative offensive scheme and system of any that I see at the prep level. And with their only loss being to IMG when their great quarterback Tanner McKee went down early in the contest, or it might have been a different story. Centennial, I'll tell you, they're going to be a tough out once again this year, and they're just fun to watch. If you've never seen Centennial play, I encourage you to either on television or go to a game. Watch how Centennial approaches offensive football. It is indeed imaginative. The winner of that game will take on the winner of the game that I think might be the most, might have the most points in it of the first round. Santa Margarita will go to Murrieta Valley, even though Santa Margarita at 7-3, the third team out of the Trinity League, they're the number 7 seed. They will have to go to Murrieta Valley and take on the Nighthawks because Murrieta Valley won the Southwestern League. I've had the pleasure of calling a couple of Murrieta Valley games, and they have a legitimate high-level Division I quarterback in Hank Bachmeyer. This young man is getting bigger. Every time I see him, I think he got bigger from week 3 to week 9, and he's legit. He's being recruited by a ton of big-time schools. He's only a junior, and he is the real deal. Marcus Spiker just tied the record for career touchdown catches for in the state. He tied Urban Johnson from Cathedral's record with 66 touchdowns over his career. So they will score. They'll score on anybody. But Santa Margarita and Rich Fisher, they've got it together. You've got a team that 7-3 overall. Santa Margarita lost to Mission Viejo 28-23. And they lost to Bosco 40-38 in league, and then they lost to Mater Dei by a significant amount, but so has everybody. But Santa Margarita's got offensive talent galore as well. Josiah Norwood is a true run-pass threat. The young man who transferred in this year, Chad Magyar, is well over 1,000 yards rushing and a terrific athlete, a guy that could go the distance on any play, and Malone Mataele. And so Santa Margarita and Murrieta Valley, that might take 40 points to win that one, maybe more. The rest of that half the bracket, you've got St. John Bosco, the number 3 seed, and Bosco is just a couple of plays away from being 10-0 again. They lost in a rain-soaked game the first week of the year out in Florida to St. Thomas Aquinas, who is as good a team that Florida has had over the last decade or so. They lost in overtime to St. Thomas Aquinas, and then they lost to Mater Dei 31-21 in the only game that Mater Dei has had to really extend themselves. Bosco has switched quarterbacks and gotten away from the run-pass threat of Real Mitchell and put in a sophomore who has an electric arm. DJ Ui Angalele is the real deal. I stood next to him when we did Bosco against Orange Lutheran, and the ball made a sound when it went by me. I mean, I hadn't heard that kind of a sound, and don't get me wrong, I'm not telling you he's John Elway. But the last time that I stood next to a guy, when Stanford played Arizona State, I happened to be down on the field back in the day, and Elway threw the ball past me, and it just sort of sizzled as it went by. Well, it was that same kind of sound when Uyangalele threw it past my ear as well, and I thought if I'd get hit in the head, I'd be dead. But he is the real deal, and he's just going to get better. He's just a sophomore. They'll take on Bishop Amat, and what a terrific turnaround for Steve Haggerty, one of my favorite guys, and the Lancers. They started out 0-4. They played a murderous non-league schedule, including Mater Dei, right out of the get-go, and yet they came around and had a chance to win the Mission League title, falling in the final week to Chaminade. But Bishop Amat at 5-5, congratulations, you get to play St. John Bosco in their yard in the first round, and I think it's going to be tough for the Lancers to advance against the Braves. Rounding out the rest of that bracket, Rancho Cucamonga, the number 2 team out of the Baseline League, their only loss on the year, they lost to Upland 30-23 in a game that could have gone either way, or they'd be 10-0 and the Baseline champ. But they're going to take on it's 2 9-1 teams here. They're going to take on San Clemente. San Clemente lost one game. They lost to Mission Viejo, and the team that moved up from Division II to Division I has acquitted themselves nicely. San Clemente played a good non-league schedule. They beat Murrieta Valley in a game I had the pleasure to broadcast. They thumped them 62-27. Then they beat Edison 23-20 and have a win over Palos Verdes. So the only loss for San Clemente and Jaime Ortiz is against Mission Viejo, and yet they find themselves as the 11 seed, and they have to travel to Rancho Cucamonga in a game that I think is going to be as tight a game as any. Both teams feature rock-solid defenses. I think the old formula of whoever turns it over and the least and wins the battle at the offensive line, that's going to be, I think, the team that moves on to take on Bosco in the second round. So here's my Division I thoughts. Mater Dei advances rather easily over Vista Murrieta, takes on Long Beach Poly, and anytime Mater Dei and Poly get together, it is always great theater. And then Mission Viejo and Chaminade advance, St. John Bosco. And, man, I tell you, I think San Clemente just might be able to knock off Rancho Cucamonga, but we'll see. That's a pick-em game to be sure. And then in the bottom half of that bracket, Santa Margarita and Centennial in a showdown in the quarterfinals. The big question in Division I has been all season long, who's going to be the fourth team in the semifinals. Everybody expects Mater Dei, Centennial, and Bosco to be in the three of the four. I think the fourth team in that just might be the Mission Viejo Diablos. I think the fact that they and Chaminade are pretty even, but I think the fact that the Diablos are going to play for Bob Johnson. They want to make sure that they get Bob as far as he can possibly go. That might be just enough in a tough one to get by Chaminade and get to the semis where they would take on Mater Dei, and what great drama that would be anytime Mater Dei and Mission Viejo get together. But we are getting way ahead of ourselves. But that's the Division I wrap-up. Once again, reminding you that go out and see a playoff game. Goodness gracious. You will get great value for your sports dollar. There are some great games. Check your various sources as to figure out a game in your area and get out there and watch some tremendous high school football regardless of the division. But we've got to get to Division IV, which I've just been handed to. We'll try to get through this as quickly as possible because there are some compelling matchups. I think once you get past the first round, things could be very exciting in Division IV, where Capistrano Valley is the top seed. They're 10-0. They're the Seaview League champion. They will take on Citrus Belt at-large team Carter. And I expect Capo Valley, who has had a wonderful run this year. They got to the finals last year in Division V, where they lost to a Calabasas team that was just more talented. But I certainly think that Capistrano Valley has the talent to get all the way to the championship game again. But they'll run into a little bit of trouble once you maybe get to the semifinals, I think, before they run into some serious opposition. Capo Valley, after getting past Carter, will run into the winner of Paso Robles and Damien. Paso Robles is the Pac-5 champ. They'll take on the Damien team that was a baseline at large. Paso Robles has not played as tough a schedule as Damien, but that trip up to Paso Robles sometimes can get the better of teams. That's kind of a pick-em game, but I think maybe Paso Robles prevails in a tough one. Only to run into Capo Valley the next round. On that rest of that bracket, Downey and Etiwanda. Etiwanda got in as the baseline number 3 team despite having a 3-7 record, and I think Downey's just got too much of everything. Jack Williams does a great job of coaching a team that always gets deep into the playoffs out of the San Gabriel Valley League. They're going to run the ball most of the time. They played a tough schedule, losing to Santa Margarita and Paramount. I think that Downey prevails there. They'll take on the winner of Corona Del Mar and Roosevelt in a game that might take 50 points to win. CDM, Dan O'Shea, does a great job of coaching up the Sea Kings. They're seldom tested in the PCL. They outscored their opponents 271-37 in the Pacific Coast League. So it's been a while since CDM's played anybody of that level. And Roosevelt, with their outstanding quarterback who's going to Hawaii, Jeremy Musa, they'll score. They scored on everybody so far, plus they played a tough non-league schedule. They lost to the likes of Servite, and then in league they lost to Centennial, Norco, and Santiago. But I would expect that CDM's got enough defense to get by Roosevelt, set up a quarterfinal matchup between CDM and Downey. Other half of the bracket, the number 2 seed, and this is a compelling team, the Cajon Cowboys, played a tough non-league schedule. Their only loss on the year, they're 9-1. They lost to Murrieta Valley 49-46. They have wins over Paloma Valley, Paso Robles, and in league they beat Yucaipa, Carter, and Redlands East Valley. Cajon's got a quarterback, a run-pass guy that is a big-time Division I caliber quarterback in junior Jaden Daniels. He's thrown for 42 touchdowns against only 2 interceptions, and so Cajon's going to be a load for Palm Springs, who is the Desert Valley at-large team at 4-6. I expect Cajon to have a relatively easy time with that one. They'll take on the winner of Redondo and San Juan Hills. Now, San Juan Hills is the higher-seeded team, but because they're an at-large team out of the South Coast League, they have to go and take on Redondo Union, who is the number 2 team out of the Bay League, and this should be a really good one. 2 teams out of tough leagues, very competitive skill sets and competition level, that should be a really good one. Then on the rest of that bracket, you've got Corona Santiago, the number 3 seed, but they have to travel. They have to go to Glendora, who is the number 2 team out of the Palomares League. Santiago, the number 3 team out of the Big 8. Santiago beat Murrieta Valley on the last play of the game way back at the beginning of the season, then also a big win over Roosevelt. They lost to Citrus Hill, Centennial, and Norco, so they've played a tough schedule, and at 7-3, they will take on Glendora, who is also 7-3. Glendora beat Los Altos, but lost the tough games that they had to play on their schedule against Damien, Charter Oak, but gave South Hills, the league champ, all they wanted, only losing 27-24. That should be a lot of fun, but I expect Santiago to get the road victory, and they'll take on the winner of Colony against Murrieta Mesa. Colony at 9-1, the Mount Baldy league champion. They lost to Charter Oak and to La Habra, but that's a forfeit win. La Habra admitted an error in having an eligible player, and so forfeited that victory. So Colony dominated the Mount Baldy League this year. The only one tough game in league. So at 9-1, they'll take on a Murrieta Mesa team, the best team Murrieta Mesa has ever had out of the Southwest League. Lost their last couple of games and took what was a really promising season, but they still come in at 7-3. They got wins over Palm Springs, San Jacinto, Valley View, and Great Oak. So in a tough one, I look for Colony to advance. And so in Division 4, I think you've got Capo Valley going against the winner of Paso Robles, Damien. Capo Valley advances to the semifinals relatively easily. Well, they'll face the winner of CDM against Downey. That one could go either way, but if it winds up being Capo Valley and CDM, an all Orange County matchup, that would certainly draw a big crowd. And on the bottom half of the bracket, you've got Corona Santiago taking on Colony in the Inland Empire, and I'm going to say San Juan Hills is going to get that victory over Redondo, and they'll take on Cajon, but I don't see anybody slowing down that Cajon offense, maybe not until they get to the final. And somehow Capo Valley against Cajon would be an amazing final in Division 4, and that one would be fun to watch and maybe broadcast as well. You just never know. Well, that is going to do it from CIF Southern Section headquarters for the CIF Southern Section SoCal Ford 11-Man Football Championship Pairings Release Show. I'd like to thank Tom Simmons in particular, along with everybody else at CIF Southern Section headquarters, who always makes this so enjoyable. Their hospitality is second to none. Thanks to David Otta, and especially to engineer Steve Banta, who has jumped through hoops of fire to get this thing on the air. Hope you've enjoyed it, because it has been a challenge, and Steve Banta is the best in the business at figuring out all the stuff I have no idea which button to push. And of course, as always, reminding you before we chat again, do something nice for somebody else. You'll be surprised at a couple of things. You'll be surprised at how good it makes the other person feel, and more importantly, you'll be surprised at how good it makes you feel. So until next time, get out and see a Southern Section playoff football game. It is the best value in your sports dollar, and you will not be disappointed. For everybody involved in the W. Collins broadcast today, I thank you. My name's Paul Westfall, and until next time, so long, everybody.